No one disputes the medical miracle of vaccines. In fact, we've discussed some of Edward Jenner's contributions, but even 70 years prior to that, we were doing inoculation, and maybe even a couple hundred years prior to that in the Middle East, they were inoculating with live, from live pustules, basically live virus with maybe some antibodies in the mix. They did this, though, because the disease was incredibly deadly. 10%, maybe 20% of the public, 30% of those who got it. But not every disease is the same. And I think that's what annoys me some about the discussion is that we think everything is smallpox and we say submit or else and you can't go to school unless you get this. And this is the debate we're going to have is how mandatory and what are we going to do to people. But there is a difference between smallpox. So you had 10 to 20%, maybe even 30% mortality. For children with COVID, from the CDC website, it's 0.68 per million. So we are talking about a different disease here. And while the recommendation on vaccines may be appropriate, I think each individual needs to make their decision. If we're prioritizing it, the death rate for those in their 80s or those in nursing home is incredibly high, 10-fold, 20-fold, maybe 100-fold higher. It's significantly higher, and so that's where the priorities should go. But really, I think each individual in a free society should assess the risks of the disease versus the risks of the vaccine. But it's important that we not get so carried away with, we have a vaccine, everybody's got to have it, and you, a kid, can't go to school, and we're going to ostracize you if you don't take it. No, why don't we try through persuasion? I mean, it's worked for the most part for most of our history. Let's try to persuade people about it. Look, we have vaccines that we've recommended for certain age groups. Pneumovax is for mostly recommended for those over 65 or those who have a significant comorbidity. I've had it. I'm 57. I've had all my vaccines. I've been to Central America. I've had all my vaccines, but I'm still for choice. Doesn't mean we just turn our brains off and say blindly everyone must submit or else. I had Pneumovax. I had part of my lung removed, and I thought, well, maybe I'm at some risk for it, and so I took the Pneumovax. But even that, it wasn't absolutely recommended. Flu vaccines used to be more recommended for those who were in risk categories and those who were older. I think at one time, flu vaccine was recommended over 50. Now it sounds like it's more extensive. And that's fine. The vaccines are incredibly safe. But at the same time, I think we really, really, really need to think through sort of our fervor here before we start mandating and making people take these tests. And so my question to Dr. Collins is, considering that the death rate for COVID among children is 0.68 per million, are you in favor of adding a school mandate that you can't go to school unless you get a COVID vaccine?
Well, I think it would be premature for me to make a statement about what would be appropriate or not, since we don't even know to what extent the vaccines that are currently being studied are going to be safe and effective in adults. And as we've talked about, we won't know until later how they work for children.
Let's say they are safe and effective for children. Are you in favor of mandating that you can't go to school unless you take one?
I would have to really understand what the consequences would be. I'm not ready to give an answer to that right now. I do think there is this issue about children getting infected and then infecting others around them that may have an immune system that can't handle it. And that's one of the reasons I think we are so concerned about having children vaccinated, to avoid the kind of terrible circumstance where a child who's getting chemotherapy for cancer and ends up getting sick and gets much more sick. And 0.68 is not zero.
But that was always true. We have hundreds of thousands of people every year who are on chemotherapy, and yet we've never sort of decided to mandate to everyone that they get vaccinated to protect those on chemotherapy. What we did traditionally is those on chemotherapy try to protect themselves from others, acknowledging that the common cold can be devastating to someone who's on chemotherapy and with very low immune response. So it's important that we think about that and we not say that we're going to mandate to everyone because of a certain population. If we have a vaccine that works, by all means, let's try to vaccinate everybody that's willing to voluntarily take it, particularly in the nursing homes, those in the elderly. And we should prioritize that. But we should acknowledge that there is an extraordinary difference in mortality. From the CDC website, less than 1 per million children die from this. So that has to be weighed into the fact of whether or not you're going to mandate. If you're going to tell every kid in America they can't go to school and you're not willing to tell me you're not, that's a big deal. The death rate is less than 1 per million, and if we're going to mandate you can't go to school without that, when you look at contact tracing studies in China, the Netherlands, Bermuda, and England, we find very little transmission. I just talked to a gentleman who runs a school called, can't remember the name of the school in North Carolina. They have 6,000 students and teachers. They've been open for 8 weeks. They have 0 cases. You know, lots of schools have been open. It's a question we need to answer and we need to discuss and not have it all be about fear, fear, fear. The truth of the matter is kids don't get it as often, don't transmit it as often, and rarely die from it. And so we need to tell the truth about the statistics and not overblow the statistics into telling people something that's not true. But that's also why the decision-making ought to be decentralized, where people in Washington don't get to tell everybody what to do. Every individual, every thinking individual in a free society gets to make those choices. Thank you.